Let's run a quick thought experiment. Imagine a Fortune 500 company. Now, imagine that company has two CEOs, and these two CEOs have equal power, but they have completely different visions for the company. One wants to launch a tech product, the other wants to pivot to agriculture. What happens to that company? It doesn't flourish. It collapses. It enters gridlock. The structural integrity of any system depends on having a single, unified point of decision-making. In the ancient world, religion was a corporate nightmare. It was polytheism. You had a god of rain, a god of war, and a god of fertility, and they were constantly fighting each other. The universe was viewed as a chaotic battlefield of competing egos. But both Christianity and Islam emerged as a radical disruption to this system. They introduced a concept that we take for granted today but was revolutionary at the time: monotheism. The idea that reality is not a committee, it is a singularity. The book of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 5, presents a God who refuses to share the stage. In a direct address to the Persian king Cyrus, God declares, "I am the Lord and there is no other. Apart from me there is no God." This is the concept of exclusion. The text doesn't say, "I am the best God." It says, "I am the only variable in the equation." It strips the universe of all other independent powers. In Hebrew theology, this is the Shema, the assertion that unity is the baseline of existence. Strikingly, the Quran uses a fascinating logical argument to back this up in Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 21, verse 22. It doesn't just say, "Don't worship others." It explains why physically impossible it is for there to be two gods. It states, "Had there been within the heavens and earth gods besides Allah, they both would have been ruined." The logic here is profound. If there were two omnipotent beings, eventually their wills would clash. If God A wanted rain and God B wanted drought, the universe would crack under the tension. The fact that the laws of physics are consistent, that gravity works the same way in New York as it does in Tokyo, is presented as proof that the source is one. So why does this matter to an American viewer today? We love science. We love the grand unified theory. Physicists are constantly trying to find the one equation that explains everything, from the atom to the galaxy. Monotheism was the original unified theory. It tells us that the universe is not a jagged collection of random forces. It is a coherent system designed by a single mind. It means that logic, morality, and physics all come from the same source. It applies Occam's razor to the cosmos. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. But this singularity creates a very specific problem for us humans. If there is only one God, and he demands total loyalty, then our habit of obsessing over other things, like money, fame, or power, isn't just a hobby. It is a violation of the cosmic order. Well, if you think the logic of one God is intense, wait until you see how both scriptures define the rivals to that God. Because it turns out, an idol isn't just a statue made of stone. It might be the thing you are holding in your hand right now. When we hear the word idolatry, we usually picture an Indiana Jones movie. We imagine primitive people dancing around a golden statue or bowing down to a totem pole. And because we don't have golden calves in our living rooms, we pat ourselves on the back. We think, "I'm good, I'm civilized, I don't worship idols." But both Christianity and Islam argue that this is a dangerous misunderstanding of human nature. They claim that an idol isn't just a physical object. An idol is anything that sits in the driver's seat of your life. It is anything you trust more than the Creator to give you safety, value, or happiness. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 24, captures this psychological reality perfectly. Jesus issues a stark warning about the binary nature of worship. He states, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." The original Aramaic word used here is Mammon. It wasn't just a word for currency. It was the personification of wealth as a spiritual force. The text creates a rivalry. It implies that money demands the exact same things that God demands: your time, your loyalty, and your trust. If you are looking at your bank account to determine your worth as a human being, you aren't just being greedy, you are worshiping a rival deity. In parallel, the Quran takes this internalization a step further in Surah Al-Furqan, chapter 25, verse 43. It asks a piercing rhetorical question: have you seen the one who takes as his God his own desire? Then would you be responsible for him? The Arabic phrase here refers to hawa, whim, desire, or impulse. The Quran is arguing that you don't need a statue to commit idolatry. You just need an ego. If your operating system is, I do whatever I feel like doing, then you are the God. You have placed your own feelings on the throne of the universe. When you synthesize these two texts, you get a devastating critique of modern American culture. We live in a society that celebrates the hustle, mammon, and tells us to follow your heart, desire. We put these things on a pedestal, but these scriptures are classifying them as functional deities. It suggests that human beings are worshiping creatures. We are hardwired to worship something. It is biologically impossible for us not to serve a master. If it's not God, it will be your career. If it's not God, it will be your political party. If it's not God, it will be your reflection in the mirror. So the question isn't, do you worship? The question is, what are you worshiping? But this leads to a massive historical pivot. If monotheism is so logical, and if idolatry is so natural to humans, how did we ever break the cycle? How did humanity shift from worshiping 1,000 statues to worshiping one invisible God? Well, if you think the theory is interesting, wait until you see the man who started the revolution. Because both faiths trace this radical idea back to the exact same person, a man who was willing to smash the idols of his own father. We tend to think of tradition as something conservative. We think of religious people as following the rules of their ancestors. But the origin story of monotheism is actually a story of radical rebellion. It didn't start with a man following his father's rules. It started with a man breaking them. Both faiths trace their lineage back to a single figure, Abraham, who is presented not as a conformist, but as the ultimate iconoclast, a man willing to stand alone against an empire. The book of Genesis, chapter 12, verse 1, records the moment this revolution began. God issues a command to Abraham that effectively destroys his social safety net. He says, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." To an ancient ear, this is a death sentence. Your father's house was your identity, your protection, and your religion. By telling Abraham to leave Ur, a center of moon worship, God was demanding a total disconnection from the polytheistic culture that ruled the world. It was a walk into the unknown. The Quran provides a cinematic flashback to Abraham's youth in Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 21, verses 57 and 58. It describes exactly how he handled the local gods. Abraham waits until the townspeople leave, and then he takes an axe to their statues. The verse reads, "So he made them into fragments, except a large one among them, that they might return to it and question." This is a scene of intellectual trolling. Abraham leaves the axe hanging around the neck of the biggest statue. When the angry mob returns and asks, "Who did this?" Abraham sarcastically replies, "Ask the big one. He did it." He forces them to admit that their idols can't speak, can't move, and certainly can't hold an axe. He uses logic to shatter their superstition. It is hard to overstate how statistically unlikely this moment was. In 2000 BC, every major civilization, Egypt, Babylon, Sumer, worshipped a pantheon of gods. It was the science of the day. Abraham was a wandering nomad with no army, no castle, and no book. He had a radical idea. There is only one invisible God. By all historical laws, his idea should have died with him in the desert. Instead, today, over 55% of the human population, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, claim to follow the God of Abraham. It is arguably the single most successful ideological meme in human history. a lone voice that somehow outlasted the pharaohs and the Caesars. But getting back to the text, this story defines what monotheism actually is. It isn't just believing in one God. It is the courage to be a minority of one. Abraham didn't wait for a consensus. He stood against his family, his king, and his culture because he saw a higher reality. It suggests that worshiping the one God is inherently countercultural. It demands that you stop following the herd, whether that herd is bowing to a statue in Babylon or following a trend on TikTok, and align yourself with the absolute. But this raises the stakes significantly. If monotheism is the truth, and if God is jealous, then rejecting this truth must have serious consequences. What happens if you refuse to smash the idol? What happens if you try to hedge your bets and worship both? Both scriptures identify one specific sin that is considered the line in the sand, the one mistake that the system cannot process. We have a very comforting image of God in the West. We view him as a cosmic grandfather. We assume that his job is to forgive us no matter what. We think, I can mess up, I can cheat, I can lie, and eventually he'll just wipe the slate clean. But both Christianity and Islam draw a hard red line in the sand. They argue that there is one specific crime that breaks the mechanism of forgiveness itself. It isn't murder. It isn't theft. It is the act of replacing the Creator with something else. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, verse 31, records a moment where Jesus drops a theological bombshell. He distinguishes between regular sins and one fatal error. He states, "And so I tell you, every kind of sin and slander can be forgiven, but blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven." Theologians have debated the nuance of this for centuries, but the core principle is clear. There is a form of rejection that closes the door. By attributing the work of God to something else or someone else, you sever the very lifeline that connects you to the source of forgiveness. The Quran codifies this boundary with absolute legal precision in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 48. It identifies the single sin that is exempt from divine amnesty. It states, "Indeed, Allah does not forgive association with him, but he forgives what is less than that for whom he wills." The Arabic term is shirk, literally meaning association or partnership. It means giving the rights of God, worship, trust, supreme love, to a created thing. The text argues that while God can overlook your moral failures, he cannot overlook treason. When you synthesize these two perspectives, you get a chilling realization about the logic of monotheism. Why is this the specific sin that gets the death penalty? It's because of the nature of the relationship. Think of it like a marriage. If you forget your anniversary, that's a sin. Your spouse can forgive you. If you leave dirty dishes in the sink, that's a sin. Your spouse can forgive you. But if you get secretly married to a second family in another state, that isn't a mistake. That is a structural dissolution of the marriage. The relationship cannot survive it because the exclusivity is the relationship. By committing shirk or ultimate idolatry, you are effectively dividing by zero in the spiritual equation. You are trying to ask the king for a pardon while simultaneously denying that he is the king. It creates a logical paradox that makes forgiveness impossible. This matters to the modern viewer because it raises the stakes of our obsessions. We think our addiction to money or status is a victimless crime. But these texts argue that when you elevate those things to the status of a god, you are committing a spiritual felony that unplugs the computer. But this leaves us in a desperate position. If the standard is total loyalty, and if the human heart is constantly drifting toward idols, how do we stay safe? Is there a daily practice? Is there a mantra that keeps the system rebooted and aligned with the one? Both faiths end with a simple, rhythmic practice, a phrase or a prayer, that is designed to be repeated constantly to keep the one in the center of the many. We know from physics that nature abhors a vacuum. We also know that systems naturally drift toward chaos, entropy. The human mind works the same way. We don't just decide to be focused on God once in 1995 and stay that way forever. We leak. We drift. We wake up in the morning and immediately the many start invading. The phone notifications, the stock market, the news, they all demand our attention. Both Christianity and Islam recognize this drift. They understand that monotheism isn't a static state. It is an active discipline. So they both installed a reset button, a specific set of words designed to be repeated constantly to recalibrate the needle back to true north. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 9 through 13, Jesus gives his disciples a template for this calibration. We call it the Lord's Prayer. Notice the hierarchy of the request. Before Jesus tells them to ask for daily bread, survival, or forgiveness, personal needs, he forces them to acknowledge the absolute sovereignty of the One. The opening line is, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done." It is a declaration of rank. It aligns the user's priority stack. It says, before I ask for lunch, I acknowledge that you are the king. The Quran opens with an almost identical structural mandate in Surah Al-Fatiha, chapter 1. This short chapter is known as the opener, and it is mandatory for every single prayer, repeated by Muslims at least 17 times a day. The central pivot of this prayer is verse 5. It is you we worship and you we ask for help. The Arabic grammar here is exclusive. It places the object before the verb iyaka, you alone. It forces the speaker to verbally sign a declaration of independence from all other powers. It reminds the subconscious, I don't ask the boss for help, I don't ask the bank for help. Ultimately, I ask the source. When you synthesize these two prayers, you see the mechanism of maintenance. Why do we need to repeat these words every single day? Because we are forgetful creatures. We walk out the door and we forget who is in charge. We get scared of a recession. We get jealous of a neighbor. We start fearing the many. These prayers are the gyroscope of the soul. Just as a gyroscope spins to keep a ship stable in rough waves, these words spin in the heart of the believer to keep them upright when the world tries to knock them over. They are the daily refusal to let the many take the throne. So, we have a logic that demands a singularity, a psychology that warns against the internal idol, a history that began with a rebel smashing statues, a red line that forbids treason against the One, and a daily practice that keeps the compass aligned. When you put these 5 points together, the command to worship one God stops sounding like a restriction. It starts sounding like a liberation. There is a profound paradox at the heart of monotheism. If you worship the many, money, fame, people, you are a slave to everything. You are a slave to the stock market, a slave to public opinion, a slave to your own cravings. You are pulled in 1,000 directions, but if you submit to the One, you are free from the many. If you fear the Creator, you no longer have to fear the creation. You don't have to fear poverty or canceled culture or political chaos, because you know the one who writes the script. To the modern mind, submission sounds like weakness. But these scriptures argue that submission to the One is the only way to gain power over yourself. It is the ultimate declaration of freedom. If you enjoy finding the unified threads in our shared spiritual history, and you want to understand the why behind the rituals, make sure you are subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.